at Chautauqua Lake, frost is in the air. Leaves have started to change colors in fall and docks are beginning to become bare. The summer of 2025 is officially a chapter in the past. During the summer, our chief photographer Chris Broadbent and I spent time here at the lake, listening to concerns of homeowners, local leaders, and organizations who are working on overcoming the obstacles they face. During this special, we'll give you an in-depth look of our coverage throughout the summer. First, we'll begin with just after July 4th weekend, when the concerns from homeowners in Burtis Bay floated into our newsroom.
Last year, the lake was perfect. The boating was clear. Everything was great. This year, it's horrible.
And I'm not even sure if it's algae or what it is that's floating in the water.
Normally, for July 4th weekend, the Lomas family would look out and see Burtis Bay filled with boats. But this year, with the weeds, they were stuck near the dock.
We were backed up. Everybody sat and just looked at the weed growth.
Last year we had the boat out, we had the kids tubing in the lake. My grandson had his jet ski out in the lake and having a good time, taking the little ones for a ride. We did none of that this weekend, none of that. We just couldn't get the boat out.
She was not where I was then, because I saw a lot of boats, yeah.
It's something we heard all summer long. Chautauqua Lake is the story of two different lakes. The north end of the lake has a deeper depth where boats enjoy typical summer activities on the water. The depth in the southern basin of the lake is more shallow. And this summer, some homeowners felt left in the weeds.
We have a Chautauqua Lake Association that essentially has kind of given up on us. That's how we feel. They've hardly ever been down here. They're working on the north end of the lake.
The Chautauqua Lake Association is an organization that travels throughout the lake, harvesting nuisance aquatic plants in the water. The CLA is a not-for-profit organization that formed more than 70 years ago.
And we started, we had a herbicide program at first. New York State Department of Conservation, the predecessor to DEC, was using chemicals in the lake. And we picked up that program. And we continued it on through into the 80s, but we felt that it was no longer appropriate to use chemicals in the lake.
The most toxic thing isn't the harmful algal blooms in Chautauqua Lake, it's the politics of all the lake organizations that just can't get along.
I feel there is a strong cooperation. I feel that it's a myth that continues that it's not happening. Yes, there's a difference of opinion, especially between one group and all the others, but at the same time, a lot of groups are working together.
It's a Hatfields and McCoys. And as much as I have tried to get the groups together, we do get close, and then we have something like this.
Chautauqua County Executive PJ Wendell tells us in March they had meetings where they discussed to begin early harvesting in May. He says the Chautauqua Lake Association did not apply for permits until April 30th.
My issue right now is we had an agreement, and that agreement fell through. And the very group that sat here and said they would do it were the ones who didn't do it. And they do have to be held accountable.
This is a very shallow end of the lake.
Douglas Conroe with the CLA said they were waiting for the state.
They told us on April 7th that they thought we should have to get a permit. They didn't give us a jurisdictional determination until 2 weeks later. We applied and all of that. Did that affect how we started up? It affected it slightly. Would it made a difference on what you're seeing here today? No, because the aquatic plant growth didn't come till mid to late May.
On January 1st, 2025, New York State implemented changes to the Freshwater Wetlands Act, which impacts some of the areas of Chautauqua Lake. The DEC Commissioner, Amanda Lepton, was in Western New York in the fall, where we asked her about these new regulations.
The new wetland law is a really important conservation tool because it ensures that we're really looking to adequately evaluate and protect additional wetlands that were previously not being regulated and protected. And so we are really committed to ensuring that as that new program rolls out, that we're really working on solving core solutions.
However, throughout the summer, we've heard many concerns about areas of the lake being designated as a wetland.
Wetlands are for wetlands. That is Chautauqua Lake, has been a lake, always will be a lake. It needs to be reconsidered.
And that's what we want. We want a healthy lake. We are not against wetlands, but this is a developed area. It does not make sense. The whole wetland regulations does not make sense for every little area in this lake. It has to change.
They're not appropriate for a highly developed navigable lake like Chautauqua. We have over 150 years of shoreline development with hundreds of millions of dollars invested, private money, and it's a lake. It's not a swamp, a bog, or any of the other things that are identified in the law and the amendment and in the regulations.
Jim Werfritz is the president of the Chautauqua Lake Property Owners Incorporated, which formed in May of 2024 to represent the interest of property and business owners on Chautauqua Lake. Chautauqua Lake Property Owners Association filed a lawsuit in April of 2025, challenging the amendment and the regulations. They're also hoping for more transparency on what's considered a wetland and what's not.
There's a whole set of restrictions for those areas in front of our properties. And then what that automatically does through the regulations is it designates 100 feet from the water's edge back onto private property, and there's a whole set of restrictions for those areas too.
There's just not a whole lot of tools in the toolbox that people can use to fight these kind of regulations. A lot of them seem subjective to me. You know, I kiddingly would say, you know, better watch out. You don't want the DEC to see that puddle in your side yard. It's got subaquatic vegetation. It's going to be a wetlands. And it's really not very far from the truth. So.
Ellen Barnes, a trustee with the Village of Lakewood, says the village sent a certified copy of a resolution asking the governor of New York to delay the implementation of the regulations until there have been economic and area impact studies, and that they are supporting the lawsuit because they have a vested interest in the outcome of the lawsuit. She believes if property values drop, they'll be in trouble, as she says around a quarter of the property taxes collected in Chautauqua County come from lakefront property around the lake.
I think we're not there yet, but I think there's a point where we get there where people start to panic. Homeowners will start to panic. They will obviously want to get their investment. If you bought your house for $500,000 and you try to put it on the market now that the assessments have gone up for $750,000, and somebody comes by and says, I wouldn't touch it for anything more than $400,000, you're losing money.
We have problems here every year, but I think this year down here was a little bit worse. And I think it was, part of the reason was because of the new wetlands regulations that made it more challenging for the municipalities and the Chautauqua Lake Association to do their weed management activities.
We reached out to the DEC and they sent us this statement saying, quote, "This year's observed growth of plants impacting recreational use and water quality is fueled by many conditions that include excessive nutrients in the water and weather. These natural processes are not attributable to permits or other requirements of New York State's Freshwater Wetlands Act," end quote. They also stated that they do not comment on pending litigation. Later in the year in September, the DEC commissioner told us she does not think these new regulations are related to the water issue Chautauqua had this summer. We asked her about the qualifications for a wetland.
So actually, interestingly, the statute is really specific in defining what a wetland is. And importantly, the way that the law was written is it talks about not just an acre threshold, but also wetlands of unusual importance that have certain characteristics like bogs, marshy bottoms, And so really our regulations almost exactly mirror what is in the statute. So we'd be happy to talk to any folks that have any questions about these really important biodiversity hotspots. Wetlands are really important for ecological reasons. They're really important because they help with flood attenuation, where we literally absorb water. They're really powerful tools to help support New York's environment, as well as reduce impacts from flooding and other challenges that we face.
Coming up, wetlands are not the only topic that's making waves between organizations around Chautauqua Lake. As we discovered, opinions on herbicide use vary. There are many organizations around Chautauqua Lake that want to see the lake thrive. However, the topic of whether or not to use herbicides is causing a divide.
Herbicides are just, they kill plants, you know, and the herbicides that we use today compared to the herbicides that we used even, 10 years ago are very selective and very environmentally friendly.
We're not opposed to it, but we think it needs to be more judiciously used and not just be, well, let's use it to get ahead here.
It's very frustrating that we have a lot of opposition from the very group who for years and years, as I've said before, were the only ones putting any chemicals in the lake. And many of those people are saying, no, it's poison. And these new chemicals are so much safer.
We felt that it was no longer appropriate to use chemicals in the lake. We learned some things that, as you learn later, consequences that you really didn't think happened. So we went away from that, and we have concentrated on harvesting for dealing with nuisance aquatic plant growth, because harvesting is the least environmentally intrusive method of dealing with them.
The Chautauqua Lake Association formed decades ago and have switched to harvesting the aquatic plants. Douglas Codrow said this summer was the perfect storm and that they were harvesting more than double of the growth they typically do.
We had heavy rain early on that caused runoff, that brought excessive nutrients into the watershed that normally would absorb into the land, but this time ran off in the lake. We had a hot, sunny, calm water period. We didn't have storms to move and break up the surface growth. So when you put that additional nutrient load into an already nutrient-rich lake, and you add good sunlight and perfect plant growing conditions, boom.
Conroe tells us there are around 24 different species of aquatic plants in the lake, and 3 are considered a nuisance.
Plants are important for the fishery. We are a world-renowned fishing lake. Fish need the plants for food and habitat. Plants absorb nutrients. And Chautauqua Lake is right now considered to be at a tipping point. It can be a plant-controlled lake, or it can be an algal-controlled lake. Plants can be a nuisance. Algae, when it gets too abundant, is a harmful, toxic substance.
I think we're hopeful that we can start doing some actual actions to prevent exactly that from happening. We don't want that tipping point to go towards algae and for this lake to be unrecoverable.
Jackie Demore is a homeowner in Burtis Bay and is on the board of the Chautauqua Lake Partnership, the non-for-profit organization that invests in herbicide usage.
It's been proven that the newer systemic herbicides target the invasive plant only, and they leave the natives to grow around it and recover. And that's what's happened here. We've had that happen over the past few years.
She shared that she's seen studies done on the lake, but not enough action. Demore shares that both the CLP and the CLA sponsored a 5-year macrophyte management program to be developed by North Carolina State by Dr. Richardson.
Their recommendation is to deal with the heavy infestations more comprehensively in the front end of the plan, and then work towards a spot treatment maintenance plan over time. So yes, I mean, the bottom line is yes, I would like to see a heavier application of herbicides to knock back some of the really problematic areas and get them more under control, as that plan suggests. And then over time, move into more of a maintenance mode.
She tells us the study also calls for a lake manager and a review board. Demore says she would love to see a commissioner or an organization that is in charge, which can act and represent the people.
To have some control over what's going on and influence over the actions that the organizations are taking. If they're not coordinated, we're not using our resources best.
We asked Chautauqua County Executive PJ Wendell on if a lake manager was a possibility. He said New York State owns the lake. However, Wendell says they're bringing in GEI consultants to look at collected data.
The Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Alliance has hired GEI as a lake management group. We're working with them. Rob Richardson from NC State has been doing studies using all of the data. The Army Corps is in studying Chautauqua Lake. So here on out, we're using data. Nothing anecdotal, no reading the Farmer's Almanac saying this is what we think. We're looking at what the data shows us, and that's how we're going to approach maintaining the lake. The problem is we need everybody on board with that. We can't put out a recommendation and somebody say, nah, we're not going to do it. That's what becomes challenging. That's where the real challenge is going to be ahead of us. Once we get this information, will people abide by it?
As organizations around the lake try to figure out the best ways to clean Chautauqua Lake. For some homeowners, summer activities were at a standstill due to the conditions outside of their homes.
We certainly hope it's an off year. If this becomes the new norm, that's going to be, that would be really concerning.
Doug Lattimore's family has owned property in Martha's Vineyard Bay on Chautauqua Lake since the mid-1800s. However, these sites that have seized their dock is something that is new.
We do get algae blooms in the heat of the summer, but that thickness of pea soup that's probably new. Yeah, that's worse than normal.
Prior to their annual family reunion, they took matters into their own hands of cleaning up the mess around their dock.
And we spent, I would say, an afternoon taking trailerfuls of seaweed out of here. And after doing it for several hours, we took a look at where we were, and we just weren't making any headway. We threw the white flag and decided that it wasn't something that we could do ourselves.
Their family spent hours trying to clear up the buildup that was in front of their home. Then later on, some of their family members started to notice something that was even more concerning.
They got a rash, which I assume came from the seaweed or the algae that's associated with the stagnation that the seaweed causes. So we've had a couple of the folks in our family get a rash on their legs from going into the water.
Lattimore says his family was told by a dermatologist it was something that was called swimmer's itch. We reached out to the Chautauqua County Health Department, which stated at the time, quote, "The Chautauqua County Health Department has not received any confirmed reports of swimmer's itch on Chautauqua Lake so far this year. However, we are aware that swimmer's itch has occurred in past seasons and remains a concern for some lake users," end quote. The agency also stated that it is important to note that symptoms commonly associated with swimmer's itch may also occur with cyanotoxins from harmful blue-green algal blooms. Later on in the summer, we spoke to the Chautauqua County Director of Environmental Health Services, Jessica Worsley, who sent out a release to alert the public about harmful algal blooms.
We advise people that anytime they're seeing an area that is really dense and does have that pea soup appearance or that spilled paint appearance on the surface, that's a possible toxin-emitting harmful algal bloom, and they should avoid that.
She says harmful algal blooms can look like pea soup, spilled paint, or can cause streaking in a lake's surface and can release harmful toxins. There is no visible cue for when toxins are being produced, so they advise people and pets to avoid these areas.
If for some reason they can't avoid it or they find themselves in it without anticipating that they were going to be in it, they should rinse off immediately, soap, water, just a basic sort of shower rinse off situation.
However, she says these harmful algal blooms are nothing new to Chautauqua Lake.
The organism itself has been around for much longer than humans have. It's a very old organism. It's absolutely native to Chautauqua Lake. It's something that has always been here. We're seeing the blooms now partially because we're having warmer summers, and the organism really blooms and thrives in warm water and sunny conditions.
These harmful algal blooms are what a group of researchers are studying on the lake. The Jefferson Project started on Lake George, studying the impact that human activity has on fresh water and how to decrease the impact. On Lake George, they found that road salt was a big problem, and now after changes, Lake George has been named one of the cleanest lakes in the country. Now researchers are collecting, testing, and analyzing the conditions of Chautauqua Lake.
We're on Chautauqua Lake mostly studying harmful algal blooms, including the nutrients that are fueling them, things like nitrogen and phosphorus.
They have been studying the lake since 2020. Every 2 weeks from April through around November, these researchers jump aboard to take water samples and measurements throughout the lake. They also have tributary stations that are constantly measuring the nutrients that are flowing into the lake. They visit them monthly or after a storm to test them manually. Data is also collected around the clock by their 2 sensor platforms.
This is really important because as humans, we've got lives, we can't be out on the lake 24/7 collecting data either. So this is really nice, overnight it's collecting data for us. Maybe when the weather isn't perfect for us to come out on a boat, it can collect data for us as well.
They have 2 of these platforms, one that floats in the north and one that floats in the south end of the lake.
The North Basin is quite a bit deeper. It tends to stratify as well, which means there's 2 distinct layers in the water column. The South Basin is a lot shallower and it mixes a lot more. So there's just very different dynamics going on.
Once they've collected all the samples they need from Chautauqua Lake, they return to their research lab here at SUNY Fredonia.
So it is really important that we get the samples off the lake and back to our lab in a really timely fashion to get them shipped out the same day to our scientists who can then run the analyses that they need.
At the lab, they can detect cyanotoxins from water samples, filter for chlorophyll, and filter the water itself. These samples are then shipped off to scientists in the Adirondacks for further analysis.
We're working really hard to understand where these nutrients are coming from and where they're ending up, but it's important to keep in mind that we didn't get to this state overnight, so we're not going to be able to fix it overnight. It's going to take a lot of hard work and a lot of collaboration from all these different groups to get things cleaned up.
We're all working hard. We're trying to do the best we can, and Mother Nature won this year.
In August, we returned to the office of the Chautauqua County Executive to see his reaction of how the summer was going.
It's kind of a perfect storm, okay? So the wetlands regulations took effect in January. This first year, we have a horrendous weed problem in the South Basin, in particular Burtis Bay, and really south of the village of Lakewood. And that's the area where it's the shallowest. And this year, in the wetlands regulations, they require a permit for harvesting in 6 feet of water or less. Why, I don't know. We've harvested in 6 feet of water or less for decades without any sort of question, but now this year, for some reason, they made a point to have a permit. Having said that, this has been ongoing. This isn't a permit they popped up and said, oh, hey, yeah, you need to have this before you start next week.
As for what will be different for next summer, he would like to see the wetland designation change.
I think, the DEC needs, I would hope this gets out of committee next year in the state and the Assembly and the Senate pass that any navigable body of water of 100 acres or more is exempt from the wetlands regulations. They regulate the herbicides, and they're now regulating our harvesting. They're regulating everything in the lake. So unless you want this to be a swamp, and I'm sure they don't, and I sure as heck don't, let us go back to doing what they're doing. You know, focus on those areas surrounding the lake, those wetlands that are designated. But to designate that lake as a wetland, I think is inappropriate.
Some of the other changes he mentioned that he would like to see is increasing technology to survey the lake, for the Chautauqua Lake Association to use a faster boat to monitor and survey problematic areas, and he's hoping to see unity in effort around the lake.
That's my job going forward, is how do we get everybody working together? And that's one of the discussions we've already had for next year. You know, we've had contracts dealing with the funding for lake organizations. Well, next year it's going to be, you know, the strategy we have with GEI is the lake management consultant group we brought on. Now, you know, your funding is going to be tied into the implementation of their, you know, when they come out with this strategy, following the management strategy we have going forward. That's critical, because if we're going to do, if one organization is going to do their own thing, then, you know, that strategy, that plan going forward isn't going to go anywhere. And that's been a concern in years past.
As for what's new at the Chautauqua Lake Association, new leadership.
This season, since the changeover in management, I have had a tremendous amount of ideas and thoughts from the community, and that's great. That's all stuff in the off season that we'll take a look at. You know, could we use this? Would this work? One of the other things we're hoping for next year is we have 4 offloading sites. We added a 4th one this year. Normally there's 3. We're going to try to add a 5th. That will also help in this lower basin because it'll be an extra spot. That makes us more efficient.
Heather Nolan-Caskey is now the general manager. She says this summer the lake had weed coverage from shore to shore, and the CLA removed more than 20 million pounds of weeds, which is double of what they removed the year prior. They shared that the CLA received a pontoon boat for them to use for a mechanic or a supervisor to use on the water. As for permits, she says she sees no restrictions for them to get out and harvest as early as need be next year.
First off, as far as the wetland permits go, they're multi-year. So we have to renew, but as long as we follow all the guidelines within the permit, we basically have it for the next few years, which is a good thing. So there's not going to be anything stopping us from being out there earlier as we had planned to be this year. And we were, we just weren't in the magnitude that we had hoped because we had some restrictions as to where we could harvest.
She also shared she believes their board supports the use of herbicides as needed.
One thing that wasn't happening previously was communication with the organization doing those treatments. And I think we now have a better relationship with them. I've had timely information of their projects. I knew when and where. That helps us to plan so that I know machines can't go in there for a week or two, or, you know, work with them, cooperate with them. And, you know, maybe they do a treatment in an area that's harder for us to service, and we work in an area that we can easily get into. That cooperation, it's just going to take coordination, but we are working with those organizations moving forward.
There is no one single silver bullet that's going to take care of that lake. It's not going to be all herbicides, it's not going to be all mechanical harvesting, and it's not going to be all protecting the wetlands. It's going to be a combination of all 3. And once those groups can all work together, and I believe they are, once we work together better, we're going to see a lot more improvement. Some of the most recent changes, I think, are going to bring about some of the most significant change going into next year.
The research of the lake will continue, and the lake will eventually freeze throughout the winter. However, something we noticed throughout our coverage here during the summer of 2025 is the dedication around the lake and the desire of cooperation amongst them all. Will these challenges they've faced return next summer, or will the tides turn? Will the scientists find a solution, and will homeowners see change? Only time will tell. Thank you so much for tuning into our coverage here on News 4. Reporting in Chautauqua County, I'm Hope Winter.